Hi everyone, I'm Megan Ernst, joining you for our last discussion together in this class. I'm going to dive right in. So my research project is titled Women's Virtue, Sensibility, and Civic Duty in Revolutionary America. And I really enjoyed completing this project. It's really caused me to have a deeper respect for women during the Revolutionary era. So women not only contributed greatly to the war effort, but they were able to parlay that participation and their contributions into a bigger role in civic life and really claim more space in the civic sphere of the new republic that would emerge. So they didn't accomplish this alone, though. The press was their ally, and prints, reprints, editorials, they all made women's relief work during the revolution more visible and acceptable during a time when they were expected to be very modest, very domestic, and very much politically silent. My thesis for this project is that American women translated feminine virtue and sensibility into a recognized form of Republican civic duty. And they did this through boycotts, provisioning, fundraising, and ladies' associations. And newspapers and broadsides really helped with normalizing these acts as public service rather than transgression or disobedience. So to put it simply, through their collective service to the Republic, women gained a legitimate foothold in civic life that was previously off limits to them. And print culture of the Revolution really helped to validate that shift rather than trying to silence it. So a little bit of historiography. Ruth Block shows that virtue in the era had overlapping meanings. Republican self-service and feminized moral ideal. So it made perfect sense to mesh these together, and it became virtuous for women to serve their country instead of disobedience by speaking out. Linda Kerber documents how wartime practice and post-war ideology assigned women moral authority in the new nation. And this would later come to be called Republican motherhood. And then we have Sarah Knott, who puts sensibility and feeling at the center of revolutionary participation. So this helps explain how sentimental idioms could authorize women's public labor in a way that was previously off limits. So the meanings of words were literally changing during this time. There was a lot of changing going on during the American Revolution. So as tensions with Britain grew, newspapers and broadsides started making domestic economy very political. So you could pick and choose how you spent your money, and those were political weapons. Women were urged to swap imported teas and finery for colonial goods, homespun goods. This was starting to turn consumption into kind of a patriotic test, if you will. And it promised esteem for virtuous restraint. So if you could refrain from buying British tea, you were seen as virtuous, and you may even possibly have some better suitors come along for doing so. So also, biblical language was very important. You've got scripture on charity, stewardship, and obedience to rightful authority. No longer Britain, right? And these all provided the moral grammar that was needed to assure their male counterparts that this work that they were doing honored God and country. So men could really rest at ease knowing that, their wives and daughters, sisters, mothers, they were all doing this work to serve their country, not as a means to disobey or embarrass their husbands or leaders. We have to remember that this was at a time when women were expected to stay at home, stay out of politics, and prioritize modesty and silence over any kind of public or political participation. So it may seem like really small changes, but these were actually really big changes taking place. And they were really the early groundwork for what would later be called Republican motherhood. And so even though there was big changes taking place, there's a lot of limits still remained. and women were far from enjoying equal rights when the Republic was founded. But by the end of the war, Americans were way more acceptable of the idea that women were valuable and their household stewardship and public service were meaningful to the country. And even though the revolution didn't actually overturn gender hierarchy, it did allow women a more space in public life and allowed them more civic participation, even if it was only in supporting roles. But as the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither were women's rights in America. So women in the revolutionary period, they really did their part. They established civic practices that subsequent generations could expand and grow. This moved into education and healthcare and charities, and eventually, way later down the line, into women's suffrage, and ultimately a more inclusive definition of American citizenship for women. So that's my research. I had a great time on this project, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has been working on and what your research has uncovered about the American Revolution. So God bless.